If you'd like to come into a comfortable sitting posture, whatever that feels like for you. Something that's stable and supportive and won't lead to a whole lot of movement. Maybe you'd like to take a moment to just appreciate the peace that comes from sitting silently in stillness. Perhaps you've had a busy day. This is a welcome change. Nothing to do for the moment, just to be present. And perhaps you'd like to notice the sensations of the breath. Maybe seeing if you can feel where they are the most prominent. And perhaps you can let attention rest there. Maybe explore a bit. See what this breath really is. No two breaths are ever the same. Perhaps you can notice some of the differences from breath to breath. Is one shorter or longer? Are the shapes different? Is one colder or hotter? the types of sensations any different? Tingling or pressure? Are there different feelings associated with the breath? Any or all of those things can be noticed by getting the mind interested, giving it a little game to play, seeing the differences between breaths. It helps the mind stay present. So perhaps that's something you can explore. Noticing the differences between breaths. And when the mind wanders, just bring it back to the breath with as much kindness as you can. There's never any need to be anything but kind to yourself. And if you feel like your mind has some stability, you might see if you can increase the amount of things that you're trying to notice. Maybe turn up the detail a little bit. There's no need to force anything, just if that feels comfortable. Where is your mind right now? Sometimes when the mind is quiet and relatively free of hindrances, it can be skillful to simply let go. So if it feels good to you, in the last few minutes, you can let go of being the meditator. Let go of any need to do anything. Simply exist as the flow of ever-changing experience. Thank you all for coming. It's good to see you all. A quick announcement. Next week for the Tuesday program, we're going to have a special guest. Bhante Santavihari is going to come. And he'll be online, but the vihara will be open in person, or for in-person people too, if you'd like to come. After that is regularly scheduled programming. So tonight I thought I would talk about compassion fatigue. And you may or may not know that term, but it's something you've all probably experienced at some point. The way I think of compassion fatigue is when suffering is perceived, the natural response is compassion. Of course, it doesn't always happen, but it can be the response. And sometimes what happens is that compassion, when the suffering is sustained and continues on for some time, sometimes the mind has trouble remaining equanimous with that suffering, and so is not able to continue acting from a place of compassion. And so instead switches to something less skillful. It might be anger or aversion or avoidance or something along those lines. And You often hear people talk about compassion fatigue in terms of care workers. So doctors or nurses or people of that nature who deal with a great deal of suffering on a day-to-day basis. And compassion fatigue might manifest in those people as burnout, just like a kind of dissociation from the people they work with, and they're not able to kind of feel their suffering and really meet them where they're at. You also hear about compassion fatigue in terms of people who are very kind of involved in the larger stories of the world. So things like war, or famine, or social justice, or climate change. I think many of these folks, feel this very deeply and want to help very deeply. But sometimes that compassion changes into something like anger at the people they perceive as causing these things. I think most people have kind of experienced this on a personal level. Maybe you have someone near you who has a disease, or maybe has a like unhelpful life situation, and it's a situation that continues, and maybe you're not able to continue to like maintain your caring for this person. So we'll offer kind of how I think of how this works and why this happens. So I mentioned that compassion is the natural response to suffering. And sometimes that compassion can be very strong, but even in the case where compassion is strong, I don't think compassion itself is ever something that's fatiguing or something that ever needs to be set aside because it's burdensome. I think what happens is this compassion gets co-opted by the sense of self. And I guess what I mean by that is the understanding of a sense of self is an understanding of separation in the world, the separation between me and you, or me and other people or other things in the world. And the mind is incentivized to perpetuate this belief because when the sense of self starts to go away, that can be like very uncomfortable and very destabilizing for the mind. So it's incentivized to interpret the world around it in ways that will reinforce the sense of self. And I think that's what's happening here. I think that compassion gets co-opted by the sense of self and gets turned from a force of wholeness and unity and love into the opposite, into a force of separation. So maybe a different way to explain that would be if you're acting from a place of compassion, the words to describe that feeling might be something like, "May you be free from suffering." But if you're acting from a sense of self that's masquerading as compassion, the words you might describe that feeling might be something like, "I need your suffering to go away." And so the difference in there is not kind of the end goal that they're pointing at. That like both of those ways of moving through the world are aimed at this person's suffering going away, but the difference is in the attachment to the outcome. So when you act from a place of compassion, from pure compassion, there's no attachment to the outcome. You simply act, and if the suffering is taken care of, that's wonderful. But if it's not, you don't push that away. You can accept the fact that suffering is still there. But if you act from a place of self, there is attachment to the suffering going away. And when the suffering doesn't go away, so when it's this continued pattern, the mind gets upset. And when it continues to get upset, it needs to kind of protect itself. And the way it does that is by pulling away, by dissociating, by turning to anger or fear or frustration or nihilism. And all of these unskillful responses are ways of separating separating from the world, separating from like you and the other person, or you and the people causing this, or just you and the suffering in general. So in that sense, it perpetuates the sense of self. And that's what I think is going on here. That piece about attachment to the outcome, that's the key to this. That's the key to kind of overcoming this. And so if you recognize this pattern in yourself, maybe I can offer a couple of ways to work with it. But if you recognize this pattern, it may be helpful to first just step back. So I guess in my personal experience and the experience of people around me, when you get into this place, it can seem like, or it seems like there's often a sense of like really needing to continue this pattern. Like I need to make make this suffering go away, or I need to continue to make the world be a better place, or I'm a bad person if I don't keep doing the thing I'm doing. I think that's usually not the case. I think it's usually better to kind of step back and to let go of all that. There's a sutta that I think gets to this point. This is the Firebrand Sutta. This is in Gurudhara Nikaya 4.95. In this sutta, the Buddha is doing his favorite thing in the world, which is to categorize things. And so he's breaking the group of people who practice into 4 groups. So there's one group who practices for neither themselves or other people. The second group practices for others, but not themselves. The third group practices for themselves, but not for others. I think I said that right. And the fourth one practices for both themselves and others. I'll read a little bit of the sutta. So he's explained all these categories. And so the sutta continues. Suppose there was a firebrand for lighting a funeral pyre, burning at both ends and smeared with dung in the middle. It couldn't be used as timber either in the village or the wilderness. The person who practices to benefit neither themselves or others is like this, I say. So the person who practices for no one is not of much use to anyone. It's not of much benefit to anyone. The person who practices to benefit others, but not themselves, is better than that. So like second in the ordering. Third in the ordering is the person who practices for themselves, but not for others. And of course, the kind of best and most skillful person is the person who practices for both themselves and others. And when I first heard this, I found the ordering kind of counterintuitive. So the idea that somebody who practices for themselves, but not for others, is more skillful than someone who does the opposite. That didn't immediately make sense to me. There's actually a couple lines in another sutta that I think explain this pretty well. And so this is from the Salika Sutta, which is related to something different. And Mahakunda is talking to the Buddha, and the Buddha says to Kunda, Kunda, it is impossible for a person who is stuck in the mud to pull another person out of the mud. Kunda, it is possible for a person who is not stuck in the mud to pull another person out of the mud. And so I think that's the explanation here. When you're practicing for somebody else, but not for yourself, your actions are not becoming more skillful, and you're not putting yourself in a better mental state to act skillfully. And in terms of compassion fatigue, if you're experiencing that, you're in a place where you're generating these unskillful emotions, and you're trying to act from that place. And you're probably not going to do much benefit to people. You're not going to be able to pull someone else out of the mud when you're kind of mired in this place of unskillfulness yourself. So I think that's a point to remember here. Like it can seem like you're doing something good when you're stuck in this cycle, but you don't see things clearly when you're when you're focused in on a particular outcome, and when you're only okay with one certain outcome happening, you can't entertain other options or other ways of seeing the situation or other ways to kind of skillfully move to a better place. You're stuck, and you're probably not going to be much help. I guess one example I thought of this phenomena is that it's happened a couple of times, I believe, that there's been a famine in some part of the world, and people very kindly send a lot of food to this place. And what's happened sometimes is so much food has been sent that none of the farmers there can sell any of their produce, and so they're not able to continue their farms. And so this like very kind gift actually ended up harming people. And I think that's what you can do when you're kind of stuck in the idea that this one particular outcome needs to happen. So if you're at that place, you might step back and try and find a way where you can act that's of benefit to both you and the other person. And that's kind of situationally dependent, but one option in that case is always metta. Metta is always helpful to you and to other people, and you can't really go wrong with that. So that's always an option, and perhaps that's something you can do until you find that you're able to act from a more skillful place, and then like re-engage with the situation. But ultimately, I think the thing that you want to understand to deal with compassion fatigue is that you are not in control of the outcome of your actions. I will digress a little bit to tell a story, but so when I was a child, maybe like 8 or 9 or something, I remember when my first like large purchase, like large thing I bought, and it was a C++ compiler. So a compiler is a piece of software that allows you to write software. And I was very excited about this. It cost, I remember it cost $100, which is a ton of money for a kid. It took me like many weeks to save up for that. And I just really enjoyed like writing programs. And I didn't understand at the time why I liked that so much. But why I like that world is because that world is determined. It's deterministic. When you write a certain line of code, you know what happens, or you know what's going to happen, because you know exactly how the system works, and you know all the parameters involved. And I liked it so much because it's such a contrast to the way that the real world works, right? The real world is not like that. Even in the best case, you never know all the parameters when dealing with another person. Like one of the first things that people learn when they meditate is how unruly and confusing your own mind is, and that's the best case scenario. You have the best amount of information about you and your mind, and when it comes to someone else, it's so much murkier. And so when you act in a way that your intention is to help someone and make it better, you don't know how that action is going to be received. You don't, and you can't. It's not a matter of not being smart enough or not knowing enough. It's something that's impossible for you to know. And this is true with everything we do. You can never know the outcome of your action, so you don't have control. And when you fully understand that, when you like internalize it down into your unconscious, you very naturally let go of the idea of trying to control the world, because it's not something you can do. And that's where the equanimity comes into play. That's when you're able to detach from the idea that the outcome needs to be a certain way. The suffering needs to go away. That misunderstanding about the world is it's completely understandable. It's like we feel like we have all these problems in the world, like things that are wrong with it, things that we want to fix. And the idea that we can control our actions it's a very comforting feeling. It's, if we could control our actions, then there's pathways to solving all of our problems. So it's understandable we want that for the sense of safety and comfort that it brings, but it doesn't work that way. That's not how reality is. And so letting go of that is that's where freedom comes in. So because this misunderstanding is so deep, like it's not something that, me having explained it to you, is going to go away. It's something that's probably going to stay with you for quite a while. So the path of practice, once you've understood that, is just to, like when you notice you're getting attached to the outcome, getting attached to the idea of someone's suffering going away, notice that you have this choice. You can act from a place of attachment and kind of roll the dice and see what happens, and you can or act from a place of non-attachment and roll the dice and see what happens, and be happy with whatever roll the dice come up with. Or you can act from a place of attachment, from a place of self, and you roll the dice, and you're saying that you're only going to be happy if you roll sixes or something like that. So you're tying your happiness to something that's out of your control, and it never makes sense to do that. Like it's always the same choice, and the calculus is always the same. It always makes sense to act from a place of non-attachment, and the process is just like repeating that choice over and over again until eventually you internalize it and you start making that choice without needing to think about it. So much of practice is just being diligent about applying the same principles. There's a poem that gets to this understanding. I read this once before, but I'll read it again just because it's very apropos. This is Autobiography in 5 Chapters by Portia Nelson. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It's my fault. And I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. And chapter 5 is I walk down another street. I always enjoy that. That's what practice is like. Just, the choice to make, you just keep making the choice. I think the last thing I would add about this is that ultimately the solution to this, which is the solution to everything, is practice. So practice to learn to see through to your true nature. The suffering in the world is hard to look at, or it can be hard to look at. And there's this progression in practice where the further along you go, the more suffering you see. And it's not that you gain a lot of willpower and you just kind of white knuckle through seeing all the suffering. There's something that happens when you practice. You start to see something else too. There's an inherent beauty and wonder to the world. And when you practice enough that the sense of self starts to dissipate and go away, that beauty and wonder shines through. And so you're still seeing suffering clearly. It doesn't negate that, but it counterbalances that. It makes it palatable. Because wherever you look, even if it's suffering or not suffering, there's beauty to it. And the way I think of it is that, the bitterness of the suffering is countered by the sweetness of the beauty of the world, and it becomes bittersweet. And so you can see anything, and you can be equanimous with anything, and just because there's something lovely there too. That's what I have to offer tonight. I really appreciated sitting with you all. I really appreciated your attention. Let's dedicate the merit. The benefit of our practice here today spread to all beings that are suffering. Thank you all.